Since Inauguration Day, two things have steadily increased for the new president: the threats against him and the security surrounding him. Homeland Security correspondent Jeanne Meserve is live in Washington this morning. Hello, Jeanne. I guess we're in tense times.
Well, Nemo, since last summer, people have been arrested for threatening President Obama in Colorado, Tennessee, and just last week in Wisconsin. The Secret Service won't comment on the volume of threats against the president, but others will tell you it is high.
During the inauguration, security around President Obama was unprecedented. Expect that to continue.
The fact that he's an African American, the fact that we're at war, the fact that the economy is pretty poor. You're right. All of those things come together to create a very, very tense environment for the Secret Service.
A bulletin issued earlier this month by the FBI and Department of Homeland Security said Mr. Obama has been the focus of voluminous threat-related reporting since announcing his candidacy, and the number of threat reports has increased since his election. The websites and chat rooms of white supremacists have seethed with hate.
The idea of a black man in the White House is an utter anathema. They think that this represents this sort of stealing of the nation which they imagine as having been created as a kind of Christian white entity.
The FBI says it is watching the chatter, looking for threats.
I think we've been very, very aggressive in looking at the potential of any white supremacy or domestic terrorism group to take some sort of action.
But the dangers to President Obama are not all homegrown. In November, Al-Qaeda's number 2, Ayman al-Zawahiri, accused Mr. Obama of standing with the enemies of Islam. In his inaugural speech, President Obama extended a hand to moderates in the Middle East.
To the Muslim world, we seek a new way forward based on mutual interest and mutual respect.
His first phone calls were to leaders in the region. But some analysts believe President Obama's efforts to co-opt extremists may inflame them and provoke them to action against him. The outpouring of emotion for the Obama presidency may make him a target of another group, the psychologically dangerous. John Hinckley, for instance, who shot President Reagan, was mentally ill.
People who plot on their own, so-called lone wolves, are the most difficult for law enforcement to detect because they often don't share their plans with anyone. Back to you.
Jeanne, do we have details of any specific threats that have been made against President Obama?
Well, the Secret Service is usually very quiet about these things, but occasionally we get a glimmer of what they're looking at through bulletins and advisories that go out to law enforcement. For instance, just the night before the inauguration, a bulletin went out warning about some Somalis who might have come into the country who they thought might pose a threat to the inauguration. Now, that's been investigated. They don't think it poses as big a threat as they did initially, but that's the only way really we find out about things, unless, of course, there are arrests, as there have been this year.
Right, and you talked there, Jeanne, about why Obama might have been particularly targeted. So are there any additional measures in place to protect him?
Well, the Secret Service won't talk about the protective measures around the president, but often when he travels, you see them all around them. You see the Secret Service, you see that heavily armored limousine, you see the snipers on the roof. There are many other sorts of protective measures, though, that of course we don't see and they're not talking about.